love me so much more than I could ever know. Your love is deeper than this world will ever show. And all of life's beauty shines around this moment now. The sky and the cliffs, they seem to change my life somehow. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. Whoa, I will never be the same. Never be the same ever again. Here I am waiting, Lord, my life is just for you. Please unfold all the plans that you would have me do. And if all the world's just a breath and nothing's here to stay, then all of the love we feel will save us anyway. And I will never be the same. Will never be the same. I will never be the same. Will never be the same ever again.
God's will is simple. The most wretched man in hell will not be Adolf Hitler. The most wretched man in hell, or woman, will not be one like Joe Stalin or some of these more modern devils. The most wretched person in hell will be a former Seventh-day Adventist.
Hello and welcome to another SDAQ&A. I am your host today and always, Peter Dixon. And my special guest is Dr. Kevin Burton. How are you, Kevin? Good to have you on the show.
I'm well. Thanks so much for having me.
I love all your links, all the 6 degrees of separation that we have. You're related. I think your wife is sister to Malcolm Clark. Is that right?
That's her uncle. Yeah, my wife's uncle is Malcolm.
Uncle.
Mhm.
Of course. Yes, that's right.
Mhm.
His sister is
My mother-in-law.
Roy's wife.
Yes, Connie.
Roy. Is it Roy or Ron?
It's Roy. Yeah,
Yeah,
you got it
Roy.
right.
And his father was Ron.
His father was Irwin.
Oh, Irwin. That's right.
Irwin, the man who
Famous
had
Irwin.
the major clash with Des Ford.
I
Right?
literally was about to ask you about that. Irwin, in many ways, was responsible for the famous moving of, or trying to. Oh, I can't remember. I won't say what I was going to say, but yeah, there was a lot of clashing, as you say, with Des
Apparently.
and Irwin, and
Yep.
so Irwin has a son, Roy.
Mhm.
I've interviewed Roy on the show in season 2, actually,
Okay.
and I mistakenly thought he was on Des's side because I'm just, back then in lockdown, I was doing 2, 3, 4, 5 shows a week
Yeah.
on Glacier View and Des Ford,
Mm.
and I think Gillian Ford had set it up for me with Roy, and so I just was on a roll of these are all Des Ford supporters, and I
Yeah, right.
was, hang on a second, he's actually more in line with his dad.
Yeah, but he remained friends, I think, with Des and
Yes.
Jillian.
Yeah,
So
yes.
that's a big difference. From what I don't know a whole lot about it, but from what I do understand, Irwin and Des, their friendship was just forever torn apart. But
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. But yeah, I really enjoyed my interview with him, with Roy. Really great guy. And I think in many ways, a lot of those interviews demonstrated to me, and recent ones as well, that you can actually really enjoy someone's friendship, even if you have quite polar opposite beliefs.
yeah,
And I think that's a healthy thing to aim for that. And
Mhm.
yeah. So it's great to have you on the program. Today, we're going to be talking about your latest book, among other many things. It's called Apocalyptic Abolitionism: How Millennialists Helped Abolish Slavery and Reform America. I've even got a graphic I'm going to bring up onto the screen. And here's a picture of the book. It's fantastic cover. It's really pops. It just stands out.
Thank you.
And
Yeah.
I do understand that you've gotten into a little bit of conflict with the book, but we can discuss that if that's just a rumor or not. By the way, welcome everybody watching. Sorry for our late start today. That happens. Yeah, but the book is now available on Amazon, and I will be purchasing my copy as soon as we finish the program. I always get the Kindle version, and I try and get some kind of text to voice reader thing, and then just listen to them like they're an audio book. And there's some incredible converter text to audio apps out there now. Amazing.
There are.
And I was watching a fair bit of your material on YouTube as well, and there was a really good interview with you and Matthew Lucio, who's been on the show a couple of times, from the Advent History podcast.
Yep.
And you and he seem to get on really well also.
Yeah, he's a great guy.
The thing I love about Adventist historians is they're not necessarily Adventist apologists. They're saying, here's the history, here's the information, draw your own conclusions. And I love that. Some of them do lean into, and now we're going to add a little bit of an apologist flavor. But yeah, I've really enjoyed your material. And so I'm really looking forward to our conversation today. I am going to just read a little intro to help people get to know you a bit better. And I've written it down so that I can remember it all and not get sidetracked. And I've also got some questions later that I'm going to ask that I've written down as well.
Sure.
I'm having to get organized and prepared, and it's hard for a musician to do that. I got to jam with your uncle-in-law, whatever,
Yeah,
Malcolm
right.
Clark, when I was in there in California a couple of years ago. And honestly, he is one of my favorite keyboardists to play music with. He said, "Do you got any chords?" before we played live at Steve Daly's church, actually, which was another interesting thing. Steve Daly has got this incredible pastoral ministry. Like, he's written these books that are quite confrontational for some people. And then at his actual church, he's just this amazing pastor. He's talking to people and caring for them. And we all went out to lunch, and he invited half the church along. And
Wow.
he paid for it all. And it
Wow.
was just
My
incredible.
goodness.
And he was just so caring and loving. There were people in his membership in the church, in the congregation, that, you know, obviously were challenged with some health problems, and he was just there praying with them, and it was quite amazing. And in the midst of this is Malcolm and I playing some background music and then singing a couple of items. And Malcolm says, "So have you got any chords or anything?" I said, "Nah, this one's in key of G." And off we went. And he was totally fine playing with
Yeah.
it. So anyway,
Yeah.
that's a little bit of a sidetrack. So here is, for those who don't know Dr. Kevin Burton, here's a little bit of information about him, and it will help everyone who is watching this program just get a feel for where we're coming from today. So I'm joined today by Dr. Kevin M. Burton, Assistant Professor of Church History at the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary at Andrews University and Director of the Center of Adventist Research, one of the most significant Adventist archives in the world. Kevin specializes in American religious history, particularly the intersection of religion, politics, race, gender, and religious liberty. His work explores how minority religious movements, including Adventism, have interacted with wider social and political movements throughout American history. He completed his doctorate with distinction, receiving the Porterfield Prize for Excellence in Research, and was selected for the prestigious Young Scholars in American Religion program. Kevin's latest book, Apocalyptic Abolitionism, How Millennialists Helped Abolish Slavery and Reform America, challenges a common assumption about religion and social reform. Rather than seeing apocalyptic believers as withdrawing from society, he argues that expectations of Christ's soon return actually fueled abolitionism and other reform movements in 19th century America. It's a fascinating thesis that touches on Adventist origins, abolitionism, politics, race, and the broader question of whether end-time belief inspires social engagement or social withdrawal. So, as I've gotten to learn more about you, I've been more and more humble and am here to learn and listen. And, I thought we'd start straight into your book and just tell us what inspired you to write it. You've written several books. Tell us a little bit about how this one came about.
Yeah, good question. Well, it began with simple questions like one of the earliest for me was, why is it that we never seem to hear about Black Adventists being in the movement until the 1870s? I wondered, were there Black Adventists in these early years? And then I had heard from maybe preachers and so forth that Adventists were abolitionists, but then I read all the historians and they said, no, they're not. They had an abolitionist background. And I started asking, well, who's right? Because I had seen some stuff in the primary literature, the original sources, and I was like, well, this is clearly against slavery. So what's going on here? And I was also wondering, why do so many people say that if you think Jesus is coming soon or you believe in some sort of apocalyptic whatever, why do they think that that means you can't be political or you can't be socially engaged? So these are the kinds of questions that are going through my mind. And the Millerites provided the perfect sort of test case to dig into this, because they set a precise date eventually of October 22, 1844, and it was the largest apocalyptic movement probably in American history. And it's kind of the exemplary case that scholars have used to say, well, see, the Millerites, they were crazy lunatics who ran for the hills, and they didn't do anything to really make the world a better place. And in fact, more than that, they had been abolitionists, but then they accepted Christ's coming, that doctrine, and then they gave it all up because Jesus would fix it all. And so I said, well, okay, let's see what's going on. Let's look at the Millerites and let's see what did they do, and how did they engage with these kinds of evils. And so that's where it began. And of course, I didn't know where I would end up.
Yeah, yeah. I wondered, as I was researching a little bit about your work, if you had, and I'm pretty sure you have, read Ron Number's Prophetess of Health.
Yeah.
And I really valued that book because I had, in the 80s, I was I was probably 19 when Glacier View happened, but more involved with music and surfing, and I was at Avondale College, now university, and I was aware of it, definitely, because my dad was a lecturer at Avondale. I would have met Des when I was a young kid, around 7, I guess. Norm Young, Dr. Lindsay, Dr. Magnuson, Salem, Drewer, Rogers, all these guys lived within a stone's throw of my house.
Yeah.
So I was very much there, but it wasn't till the mid-80s that I started kind of going, hang on a second, what's going on here? And I
Right.
remember reading The White Lie, Walter Ray's book, and I could only get through like a chapter. It was just too confronting. And I did no more reading on the topic for another 5 years. And then in the early, it was just too distressing. I ended up moving to New Zealand for a few years, and just got involved with church and music, and being a cultural Adventist, and enjoying it, not complaining. But in the 90s, when I came back to Australia, the late 80s, early 90s, I was just sitting at my parents' house, and I saw on the shed, it's in the back, right there, the Prophetess of Health book. It's hard to see, it's a bit out of focus, but you might have a copy. Oh, that is classic. Keep
I
holding
have
it
the
up.
first and the third edition, and Ron signed this one to me.
Wow, that
Oh,
is
there it is.
amazing. That
To
is
Kevin Burton, my new best friend, with appreciation, Ron Numbers, September 21, 2022.
That is so cool. That is so cool. So you do know the book.
Yeah.
So I read it, and that was kind of my first realization that Adventists, not that he was at the time when he wrote it, but Adventist, looking at Adventism, there is a way to do it that is more analytical, and that was my first really foray into going, we can look at this terrible stuff, we can just look at it and read it and try to come to terms with it in a less provocative kind of way, I guess.
Right.
And that book is one I highly recommend. But it is also challenging. How did you feel when you read it? As you read between the lines in some ways, and you would have been a young guy when you first came across it. As a historian, you're probably already into Adventist history. Did it shake you a little bit in reading it, or were you able to keep this distance in looking at the research and information without it affecting you too much?
Oh, that's a great question. I appreciate the book, and I respected Ron, and I am grateful for the memories I have of him. I don't think I was shaken by the book. I I think most of it is accepted generally among scholars now. I do have one sort of point of disagreement, probably. I think that Ron sort of leaned toward, suggesting that Ellen White flat out lied about things, and I'm not sure that I would go that far. She could have been more open, probably, about her sources and things like this, but well, it's been so long since I've read it. I can't say if I'm speaking to that exactly right, but I remember more recently reading George Knight's summary of it in the Reclaiming the Prophet book, and I feel like I pretty much agreed with what he said and how he said it, which was something along the lines about how Ron kind of suggests that she lied. So,
Yes, yeah.
yeah.
I lean to agreeing with you on that one, and particularly being a musician and traveling in that whole realm for 30 years of each night playing music and being aware that there's an element to it that is a little bit, what's the word for it? It's very real, authentic, and grounding. You can't live in la la land if you're doing it professionally.
Yeah.
But there's an element of a show to it. There's an element of a bit of a circus kind of 3-ring tent, and while I loved every minute of it, there was only
Yeah.
one time early on that I thought, oh, I'm committed to doing this for a living. Can I do this night after night and tell the same jokes and sing the same songs? And of course you don't, but
Yeah, right.
I loved it. And when I read some of the stories of how, I think Willie White writes a little bit about how their show would unfold, and James would come on and set the scene, and he was like the support act in a way, and apparently he was a good speaker. And then, Ellen White would come out and she'd talk a bit, and then she'd go off into vision, and then she'd kind of have a little bit of a need to go off the stage, and her aides would come and take her off the stage, and they'd literally bathe her and redress her while he would be talking and passing around the hat. And then she would come on and talk again a little bit about what had just happened, and now that she was back to earth. And so when people do something like that, it doesn't put me off as being fake. It's just part of what you have to do. If you're down or you've had a bad day, you still come on stage and go, "Hey, it's great to be here, everyone. I'm really looking forward to tonight." It doesn't take away from any authenticity at all, and I don't believe it's being fake. And I feel like a lot of Ellen White, particularly when James was gone, leaned a little bit into having to be a little bit on show, and I think she just ran with some things, and she had Fanny and Marion, and but what's Andy Warhol had that too. He had a whole factory of artists that were putting his name to the artwork, and this milieu of enthusiasm and excitement and showmanship or showpersonship that I think is important for people to realize I was probably going on a bit with Ellen and may have helped to color it. And so some people, if they want to criticize her, I think they go down wrong rabbit holes.
Yeah, well, she was a very complex woman, and she certainly did have, especially in her later years, Gilbert Valentine has shown how she had a pretty luxurious life. I mean, getting daily massages and all kinds of things. I mean, people cared a lot about her, and they were willing to do so much for her. So
she was a star. She was
the
a
star.
Yeah,
she was the rock star.
Yeah.
Yeah, she's an absolutely fascinating woman. And has a very incredible life. It's really sad that more scholars haven't written more about her, and we still don't have an actual scholarly biography of Ellen.
Wow.
That's unfortunate. I mean, we get closer with this, but this is focused just on health,
Yes.
and you have the Ellen Harmon White book, which is edited though. So,
yes.
But it's not a full-on regular biography. So
and Ron was involved with that too, wasn't he? Ron was
Yeah,
involved with that.
he
Yeah,
was.
yeah.
And he was involved as well and edited The Disappointed. Did you ever read that?
Yes,
He and Jonathan
yes,
Butler. And
that's right.
that was a book that I was able to interact a lot with in my own work.
Wow.
Um,
Yeah.
is they have Ron Graybill published, he published a chapter on the Millerites and the abolitionist connection. And he came down on the side that, there may have been a few that remained engaged, but they generally speaking, they became ex-abolitionists. And so he was one of the ones that I interacted with, and I appreciate Ron's work. But when what I found, it was a very different story.
Mm,
So the Millerites actually, not only did they remain engaged, but they actually shaped the entire anti-slavery movement and changed the course
yeah.
of American history.
Yes, yes. See, there's positives that come out of it. And
Yeah,
and
it's
when you look at someone, see, I was living the life of a professional musician, and
mm,
I loved it, but I was never famous or wealthy. Those who do get into the fame and wealth, there is another level of things that the average person doesn't realize that they have to deal with, and
yeah,
they can get a little bit besotted with power, their own
mhm,
press,
yeah,
and they can therefore control and manipulate the narrative. But
yeah,
again, I don't necessarily feel that that is something we should all hugely criticize. Now, I'm going to get a bit of pushback for saying that. I do think that it went to her head a few too many times, and she abused her power. Um,
yeah.
but,
Well,
we see it in today, you've people like Walter Veith, Doug
mhm,
Batchelor, Ty Gibson, David Asherick, anyone that gets to a position of fame that you can see that they start to control their narrative quite
mm,
tightly, and they
mm,
try and rewrite a bit of history, and they try and,
mm.
make themselves look as good as possible because that's good for the show.
Yeah, it's human nature to do that, I
Mm,
suppose,
and
I get it.
And her house that literally is just down the road from me,
Oh,
like
okay.
half a kilometre away is the Kurrambong where she
The
lived for
sunny side,
9 years,
yeah,
Sunnyside,
yeah,
and you
I've
might have
never had
been.
the privilege of being there, so
Well, if you're ever here, I'll show you through it, and you can stay as long as you like here as well. But,
I'm gonna take you up on that.
yeah, you're more than welcome. It's a beautiful part of the world.
Mhm.
But even by today's standards, it is a beautiful house.
Mm,
And she had, people helping her. She did so much for the community. There's a book by Marion de Berg. I usually have it here with me, who
yeah,
has
about
sadly passed away.
Australia and Ellen White there, I've
Yeah,
seen it.
and oh my goodness, the things, and my
Mhm.
mother has done a bit of, historical research as well, and there are key families in Kurrumbong that are still around today that were around, and she talks about them, and they were,
Oh, wow.
plumbers and builders, and she was really good at
Mhm,
using her fame and power to
mhm.
positively influence the community, which
Yeah.
also, as any politician knows, helps to elevate your own status as well. So there's this complexity we're talking about here.
Oh, of course, she was a public figure, an icon, and,
Yeah,
I mean, yeah, it's complex, yeah,
yeah.
but
Look,
fascinating.
it is absolutely fascinating, and I've come to the conclusion that she was a false prophet,
Mm,
but I also, I temper that with a lot of understanding of the time
yeah,
and the incredible nature of her as well, and the
yeah,
fame and the power and the wealth, and it that makes it even more fascinating. Um,
sure,
Most people assume that the more apocalyptic a religious movement becomes, the less interested it is in changing society. Your
right.
new book argues almost the opposite. What evidence convinced you that apocalypticism actually fueled abolitionism?
That's a great question. So this is a time in American history where almost every single Christian does not view slavery as an immoral thing. They don't view it as a sin. I mean, slavery had been practiced for millennia. Most slaveholders in the South are Christian, right? And so they won't call it a sin. In fact, all the northern major denominations in the North, like Baptists, Methodists, Presbyterians, Congregationalists, and more, they won't refer to or consider slavery a sin until the middle of the Civil War. John R. McKivigan showed that back in the 1980s. And so one of the key things that the Millerites are doing is they are preparing to meet Jesus in their mind. And so a key part of that is identifying what sin really is and trying to help people free themselves from it. And so they view slavery as a heinous sin and are adamantly encouraging people to repent and ready themselves and to prepare to meet God. And they you see lots of evidence for this. They're involved in every single aspect of the anti-slavery movement. They are developing new tactics that will become widely used by abolitionists, including non-Adventists like William Lloyd Garrison, who's very reputable. They play a role in actually helping make Garrison who he was. One of the key things for Garrison, well, there's two really. It's coming out of Babylon, coming out of the churches. And the Millerites were a major driving force of that. They were the largest come outer group who were advocating to come out of these churches because of the sin of slavery and other kinds of evils that they were engaged in. And so they actually comprised about 50% of the entire come outer movement. And so people like Charles Fitch, they sparked the largest wave of come outerism, which was a big boon for Garrison. But the thing that was really quintessential for Garrison was what's called disunionism. And that's this idea that the northern states should leave the southern states because of slavery, which was the opposite of what happened in the American Civil War. And that was called disunionism. And that was a tactic that Millerites developed in a revival in Haverhill, Massachusetts. And they craft the first disunionist petition, and they sent it to John Quincy Adams. John Quincy Adams had the guts to present it at Congress. And when he did so, it caused the biggest firestorm in American history over the issue of slavery. It led to John Quincy Adams being put on trial for treason in Congress. And one of his colleagues, an abolitionist colleague, Joshua R. Giddings, ended up getting kicked out of Congress and then immediately sent back by his constituents. This awakes Garrison to the beauties and power of disunionism, and he adopts it. And in 1844, the American Anti-Slavery Society will officially endorse this tactic as and make no union with slaveholders their official motto until slavery is abolished in 1865. There are numerous other ways as well, and I go into all of that detail in the book, including things like partisan politics with voting and anti-slavery parties that are organized, and that Millerites are playing a massive role in giving it a real vital force or power within the antebellum America. Some of the most significant leaders in that movement are Millerites. And there are hundreds of Millerites who believe that the world is going to end in 1843 and 1844 who are running for office in those very years, which is very interesting. And so contemporaries also noted, many of them, that Millerites were often the most fervent of all the abolitionists, and they most of the other abolitionists actually thought of them as allies and so forth in the cause, but they did have some critics as well. But they're doing this at a time when all abolitionists are starting to fight each other because there's a big schism in the anti-slavery movement from the 1837 or so to 1844. And so it gets complicated. It gets complex. But anyways, there's a lot of data, a lot of evidence, and I show that anything from the things I've mentioned to barnstorming into churches and denouncing slavery and getting violently evicted, to also intentionally choreographing rituals to show people that black and white people are equal and that they're going to worship together in heaven, side by side, at a time when all white people think pretty much that blacks will not even be in heaven, or if they're there, they'll be like segregated in some distant corner. So anyhow, it's a very colorful book. And the story is surprising in a lot of ways. And most of it is new information that we had never known before. So,
I
yeah.
highly.
Sorry, that was a lot.
No, that's good. Yeah, way
Yeah.
more articulate than my rambling on. Yours are actually succinct spoken word. But we're talking to Dr. Kevin Burton today, and we're not going to just talk about this book, but we are chatting about it. And I just want to encourage anyone that has got an interest in Adventist history and the complexities of what was going on, go and buy this book. It's available on Amazon right now, and I really encourage people to go and check it out. Now, Debbie Cozier just wrote an interesting, where's it gone? Comment to what I was saying about showmanship. I don't think showmanship is a good explanation for what Ellen did. Going into trances and speaking of her divine encounters, are you really saying that? I'm saying, Debbie, that when people in the world of circus, carnies, carnival acts, which every single person that does what they do night after night to an audience, whatever way you want to look at it, if there's an audience and you're on stage and you're doing it night after night, there are certain things you cannot maintain in the milieu of all of that going on around you. And so I'm just suggesting, if you realize that a component of Ellen G. White's whole shtick is part of putting on a show and being a powerful, famous person, it doesn't necessarily explain all her actions, but it does help you set the scene for just a whole other way to look at how these things were going on. There's truth, there's serious social issues that Kevin's been talking about. People that are famous and caught up in all of this can do great things and can shape even whole nations by the movements that they lead. And as part of what you're saying there, Debbie, going into trances and speaking her divine encounters, am I saying that? Yeah, I am. For me personally, I do think that Ellen would, I'm not saying she lied, but there would have been moments where she thought, okay, glory, 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 I need, that's going to come out now because it's the right time. It's the right timing right now. The audience is just at that right moment. Glory, glory, glory. And yes, she implemented certain tricks. I'm almost certain of it. So, but thanks for your comment there, Debbie. Now, you may have already answered this one. Oh, by the way, Debbie Cozier has got a fantastic new YouTube channel, Adventist Stories, I think. And Debbie, if you're still watching, put it in the link and I'll quickly give it a plug on the screen. She interviewed Mary Kay that wrote the Now book, who is, I think, Mary Kay Silver now. But she was Mary Kay McLeod back then. And she wrote this book when she was young. And she also was very involved with helping get the church on track with equal pay. So that's a fascinating interview. So quick side plug there for Debbie's show and interview.
And Spectrum just published a new edition of her book, Betrayal.
Oh, really? That is such a good.
And Laura Wibberding has written a great sort of historical synopsis of everything that happened. And that was released. They released it at the General Conference session, actually. At the Spectrum.
I remember that now.
Spectrum Lounge. Yeah.
Yes. And I tell you what, that's a fantastic book as well. I only read the online version that was available for free. In fact, Alexander Carpenter, hopefully, cross fingers, is going to be on the show tomorrow at this time.
Oh, great.
Yeah, we're going to do a weekly show like that's only maybe 20-30 minutes long each week. So those watching, Good News Fellowship is finding a new home, and our normal slot on Thursday, 6:30 p.m. Pacific time, is going to be a weekly show where I ponder the politics and theology and current events of Adventism, and Alex Ander is going to be a regular contributor. So I'm hoping he comes on tomorrow. We've been chatting about it. This question you've kind of already answered in a way, but I'll ask it again in case you want to unpack it a bit more deeply. You're suggesting that there was a significant involvement. How significant were the early Adventists in the abolitionist movement compared with other religious groups? Have historians generally underestimated their contribution? You've kind of said yes, but now by comparison to other religious groups, how did the Adventists kind of involve?
That is a great question, and it depends on how you want to draw comparisons. And so I think that the majority of abolitionists were not Millerites, but the Millerites had a very sizable contingent of the overall anti-slavery movement that could have been it could have been as high as even 25% or more. So they had, especially like within the Liberty Party, which is an abolitionist party, they had enough power to where you really couldn't cross Millerites. And a few people did, and there are some times where they got buried or shut down if they criticized Millerism too much. But this is before the Great Disappointment. And so the Millerites had a lot of influence before 1844 fall time period, and then they lost it all pretty much. And so after the Great Disappointment, they do stay involved. They are there, but they don't have as much influence anymore because of the failure of the belief that they had. But in comparison to other groups, most of the abolitionists were very renegade, and they were not traditional Christians, at least in terms of race and slavery. A lot of them were evangelicals, but then most abolitionists will leave their churches in 1843 and 1844 before the denominational splits of the Baptists and the Methodists in 1844 and 45. And so if we're talking about a percentage of overall membership, the Millerites were much higher than most Christian groups in America. There were probably, or at least 90% of the Millerites were abolitionists. If you're looking at Methodists or Baptists, it's going to be probably less than 5%, or maybe less, certainly less than 10% of those groups are going to be abolitionists. And so there may have been more of them in numbers, but not percentage-wise, if that makes sense. So the abolitionist groups tended to be from renegade Christian kinds of groups, and most of them ended up coming out of their churches, and so kind of leaving the evangelical majority. And so there is a sort of a myth in a lot of people's minds that like the evangelicals and Christians were the ones who ended slavery in America, and that's largely overstated. And so forth. And it was, according to the abolitionists, the evangelical Christians were primarily the main problem. They viewed the churches as the right arm of the slave power. So Millerites are in sort of rare air in the sense of percentage of like the overall. It was an abolitionist religious movement, okay? And so there were very few others out there like this. You have Christian Unionists, Christian Connectionists get there. Free Will Baptists are abolitionists, but these are all small. And all the big religions, all the big denominations, they were primarily pro-slavery. Does that clarify?
Yes,
things?
yeah, that's good. I'll bring in a couple of questions that are on the track and one not exactly.
Sure.
How did this is Dexter Lab? How you going, Dexter? Good to have you on watching. How did abolitionists vary in thought within Millerism, specifically Uriah Smith, for example?
Okay, great question. Yeah. So what happens? Abolitionists are primarily united up until about 1837, and in the summer of 1837, they have the first internal tension that leads to rupture. And you have some abolitionists that start to attack William Lloyd Garrison and the tactics that he was using to try to fight slavery. And so what happens increasingly from 1837 up into the middle of 1844 is that abolitionists start to really fight with each other about how can you actually effectively attack slavery when it's so entrenched in the systems of America, both political and religious. And so this was a really challenging thing. And most abolitionists, they end up leaving Garrison, and they try other things. Probably most of them go to the Liberty Party, a third political party that only is trying to abolish slavery immediately and also provide equal rights for Black people, especially men in terms of voting in America. And so they go different routes. And then eventually by the 1850s, actual violence is becoming more of a tactic. And this leads to things like Bleeding Kansas and John Brown and his activity. as well as others. But anyways, Uriah Smith is an interesting case because Uriah Smith ends up holding on to a lot of these Garrisonian tactics. And what are those? That includes non-voting. Okay, they view the Constitution as pro-slavery, as inherently corrupt. And so Garrison does not want to support that system whatsoever. And Uriah Smith is among many other later Seventh-day Adventists who will take a similar position. And they don't want to support that system, which is interesting too, because this is a system that only allows white men to vote, right? Women are not allowed to vote. There's only 4 states in New England that will allow black men to vote, and that's Massachusetts, Maine, New Hampshire, and Vermont. But voting's public at this time. So even in those states, there's a lot of repercussions, sometimes violence, if black people tried to vote. So black people virtually didn't vote even in the North, right? So to protest voting, to protest the Constitution in this way was arguably, from their perspective, the best way to do it. But then you have other people who say, no, the Constitution is actually anti-slavery. It actually grants all of the different the federal government actually has the right to abolish slavery, and it's not an infringement on states' rights. They argue this kind of thing. That is picked up by the Liberty Party. The Liberty Party will eventually cede the Free Soil Party in 1848, which will cede the Republican Party in 1854. But there's a minority that hold on to that. And I'm getting back to Uriah Smith with this. And the minority, they end up establishing the Radical Political Abolition Party. And that party in 1860, for example, is trying to put Gerrit Smith, who was a white Seventh-day Sabbath keeping Millerite, and they try to put him in as president of the United States. Some of the people that are supporting this party, this minority party of just a few hundred people at most, a lot of them were former Millerites or current Sunday keeping Adventists, and others were Seventh-day Adventists. And one of them in that party was a man named Anson Byington, who was the brother of John Byington. And I suspect this is behind the question that was asked about Uriah Smith, because Anson Byington gets into a clash with Uriah Smith in the review. And they're debating tactics. And Uriah Smith says, well, we are anti-slavery. Everyone that I know in the church is anti-slavery, but they don't think that voting is a good way to do it. And they don't think that slavery will be abolished before Jesus comes. And yet they're preaching against it everywhere they go. And so Anson Byington believes that we have to vote. We have to vote to get rid of slavery. And I think a lot of us can see that as a more logical tactic today from where we sit in this day and age in 2026. But it was a real debate for abolitionists back then, and it wasn't something that was unique to Adventism. Uriah Smith is taking an essential Garrisonian kind of approach, and then Anson Byington is taking an essential, what you would call maybe a political abolitionist approach. And so it just comes down to tactics. When you look at what they're actually fighting against, they're all fighting against slavery, and they're just doing it the best way they think they can do it, right? And so that's ultimately what scholars have said happens with the schism in the anti-slavery movement. Some people have said, oh, it damaged the cause and it made it harder to do the work and everything. Well, there was tension. All of that's real in some sense. And yet I think the general consensus among historians now is that the anti-slavery schism actually was a boon to the anti-slavery movement because it allowed for the maximum number of people to join the movement and use whatever tactics they thought was best to fight slavery.
What kind of time period are you referring to? Perhaps not just in your book, but just in what you're speaking about now. It's kind of pre-October 22 and soon after. I'm sure there were shifts and changes.
Right.
Roughly a time period of
my
this kind
book
of
covers
involvement.
my book covers from the 1820s to up until roughly the Great Disappointment.
Yeah, that's what
I
was
initially
thinking, yeah.
I initially thought I would be able to go all the way to the Civil War, but I found way too much data. In fact, more than I could even include in this book.
Yeah.
But when it comes to Uriah Smith, we're talking about the 1850s at this point. So after the Great Disappointment,
Yes.
when he gets into this debate with Anson Byington, it's in mid to late 1850s. The exact date escapes my mind right now.
Yeah,
But
yeah. No, it's a very interesting period of time to be looking at.
Yeah.
Just as an aside, and Christina asks, and just before I bring it up on the screen, CD Brooks that does that classic intro.
Yeah.
Some people have said it's AI and it's out of context. It's not out of context, although he is speaking at Oakland, and he does say later that he's saying the especially bad person is a former Adventist who comes from Oakland. But that, to me, that covers everybody anyway. But I'm pretty sure the story goes that in the 60s, maybe 1964, he was at the GC, the General Conference, with another, I don't know if the right terminology, is it okay to say black pastor? I'm not sure what the current political correctness is on all of that, but he was with another fellow worker from his conference, and they were about to go into the cafeteria, and the young man that was with him, CD Brooks, and I don't know if you might be able to tell me if this is confirmed or not, can be confirmed, but he said, we can't go to that part of the cafeteria. We're welcome at this part of the cafeteria. So there was actual segregation, allegedly, at the GC.
There was. That's not alleged. It's a
Yeah.
fact. It's a
Yeah.
fact. And Adventism has a interesting story when it comes to race, because even though they begin as an abolitionist church, they don't remain on the forefront of
Yes.
racial justice.
Yeah. Yes.
They
Yeah.
don't.
And do you think, I've got so many questions coming because I'm so excited to have you on the program, because I love the knowledge that you've spent a lot of time garnering. When Ellen White talks about going to heaven and everyone's going to be white, is she speaking metaphorically, or is she literally meaning white skin?
That's a great question. And it's, oh man, it's hard to say definitively because she doesn't really clarify it. What's interesting about that quote is that she's speaking to a black audience. And so whatever she meant, she thought her audience would find that to be a positive, wonderful thing to say that would encourage them.
Yeah.
And as far as we know, they appreciated those words. I think she probably meant white. I don't know, though.
Well, she was probably saying, you guys, it's so hard for you on earth, but one day when you're in heaven, you'll all be white like us, and it'll be less difficult for you.
There's the language in Revelation of whiteness with purity.
Yeah.
And it's hard to say. I don't know. I have seen a few other people argue in earlier years, actually in the period that I write on in the 1840s and so forth, not Millerites, but they said that when people get to heaven, everyone's going to be white. And so, and they meant skin color.
Yes.
Clearly.
Yes. Yeah.
So it would not be out of the realm of possibility that Ellen White had this sort of view, but she could have also talked about it metaphorically. What's interesting is there's a great book written by a couple of non-Adventist historians called The Color of Christ. And in that book, they talk about how most Christians in America gave Christ a color, and that was definitely white. And Warner Sallman's, the head of Christ and so forth, is the preeminent famous one that like everyone had in their home during the mid-20th century. Well, but what's interesting is they found that Ellen White was in a different group where she resists that narrative, and she typically refers to Christ not in terms of skin color, but actually uses the terms of, and the metaphors of light. And so when it comes to the color of God and the color of Christ, they show that Ellen White is talking about him in non-colored terms. It's about brightness and so forth. And so she really honestly may have meant purity, and whiteness of character, but in the sense of purity. But it's unclear. That's an interesting statement because she only makes it once, and it doesn't seem to fit other things that she says. I'll give a quick plug to my friend and colleague Benjamin Baker. He has a book coming out with Oxford University Press early next year, and it's going to be the first major study of Ellen White and Black people. And so that's going to be a great book, which really lays out her views on race throughout her entire life and what she does to navigate racism in her own lifetime. So that's an interesting book. I've read the manuscript already.
Might be a good guest on the show down the track.
He would be a good guest on the show. Yeah.
What when did she make that comment? What year?
Oh, that's a great question. That's in the 1890s, I think, but I don't remember from the top of my head. But she's speaking in the South, if I remember correctly, and it wasn't really until the 1890s where we started to have a sizable group of Black Adventists down in the South,
Mm,
and so I believe it's that decade, but yeah, I think it's that decade.
yeah,
It could have been no, wait a second, 1890s, she's in Australia.
that's right. Yeah, 90.
So it's not that decade.
Yeah,
So it would probably be after she got back.
right, right.
Yep, it's probably in the early 20th century.
And she did recommend elsewhere that black and white shouldn't marry and have kids. And I
That
think
is
she was
true.
meaning that socially, social, so with regards to being in society,
Yep,
someone of a mixed race was finding it much harder
that's
to
right.
live in society. And she was perhaps referring to that rather than saying don't marry a black person.
Yeah, she was really pragmatic about it, and it makes sense when you understand the time. Yeah, if you had an interracial coupling, marriage aside, if you produced a child of mixed race, that child, even if the parents were married, they would go through hell and high water.
Yeah.
And so she gives that counsel. She does know though some interracial couples. Ariel Barr, the first Black Adventist minister in the 1850s and 60s, he was married to a white woman, and she says that he's a man to be relied upon, and so forth, and never objected to his marriage to a white woman.
Yeah, that seemed to be more pragmatic. I wonder too,
So,
with the other statement about you'll all be white in heaven, if she was trying to be pragmatic as well and just kind of got her the
that
society
one
of
needs some
heaven
more
is similar
research.
to earth.
Yeah, that one needs to be like a deep dive could be done
Mm,
on that to
yeah,
really try to understand what she's saying. Because I mean, I've seen a couple of newspaper accounts, like I said, where they are saying that black people are going to become white in heaven, and I'm pretty sure it meant skin color. But I am not aware of any historian who has ever seen this as a phenomenon in 19th century America, for example.
mm,
But if someone was to look at that, then we would have a better idea of what may have been going on in Ellen White's mind as she
mm.
says this, right?
When I spoke of and again, I don't know if it was C.D. Brooks, but you've confirmed that there was segregation at the GC in the cafeteria. When did that change? Because
Yeah,
64-ish, that's fairly recent history.
it is.
Um,
Yeah, right, right,
when
right.
did the GC wake up? Who was the president at the time that said, "Hang on a second, we've got to stop segregation in the cafeteria"?
Yeah, that's a great question. Now, I don't remember the president at the time, but according to Samuel London, who wrote the book on Adventism and the Civil Rights Movement, published by the University of Mississippi Press back in 2009, I think, he argues that the Adventist Church was one of the very last
Yeah.
churches in America to end racial segregation, and in some places, they only did it because they were forced to by the government.
Yes, yes, I've heard that.
And so that is leading me to suspect that it is probably the late 1960s, excuse me,
Yeah.
that it happens. And please, someone go on Wikipedia to that page where it lists all the GC presidents and just look up
Just work the time is, yeah.
yeah,
Yeah.
who that is. I'm drawing a blank right now.
It would have possibly been Pearson or Wilson.
Could have been Pearson. It could have been,
Yeah.
but is he out by 66?
Yeah, I think you're right, and I think Wilson Neal took over after that, but
Okay, so
Pearson was very old school. It's interesting too that I mentioned Mary Kay earlier and
mhm,
her book Betrayal. It
yeah,
was it the equal pay kind of scenario didn't happen until legal action was threatened as
that's
well.
right. That's
Adventists kind
right.
of seem to only want to change if it's and I feel that way with
Yeah.
women's ordination. It'll only change if there's some legal action.
Yeah, no, you're probably right, but the thing that's interesting too, and that's significant from the Mary Kay case, is that it was her case going all the way up, in the courts
Mm,
that impacted and helped not just Adventist women, but women of
yes.
any sort
Yeah,
of in any sort of employment. And
yeah.
the new edition that Spectrum has published, they have a lawyer who went through and found that that case had been cited more than 500 times in
Wow.
other cases. So it was very influential in
Yeah,
American history.
yeah.
And so in that case, at least, Mary Kay helped to change American society writ large.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's another reason I recommend people go and watch Debbie Cozier's
Mm.
YouTube channel, Adventist Stories.
Mhm.
Just type in Mary Kay. She discusses that. I was very jealous that she pipped me at the post with that interview.
Oh, man.
Christina wrote earlier, and I was going to bring it onto the screen,
Mhm.
and we're talking about pay now. Is it true that African Americans, as employed by GC churches, get paid less? I don't think they would now. But was there a time when the disparity was women and people of color got less pay?
Oh, 100%. Absolutely.
Wow. Yeah.
And there were times when white church leaders were they were money is donated to support like Oakwood in the South, a historically black Adventist college, and white leaders would divert that and put the money somewhere else to serve white people. No, it was bad, and
Wow.
Ellen White fought that a lot herself, and she threatens to withhold her own tithe if the money is not given to for the black work when it's intended to be. And so, and she took that to her grave. A lot of people don't realize this, but Ellen White, in her own will, her last will and testament, left a tremendous amount of money to the black work in the Adventist church. It was something that she cared deeply about. And so, yeah, no, but that definitely happened.
Yeah.
It definitely happened.
Wow.
And humans are humans, and there's not any perfect group out there, religious or not, that is free entirely from racism. It just doesn't really.
No.
Prejudice is
It's
just too
baked into the
ingrained.
human condition.
It's part of the human
We're
condition.
wired to be very cautious and skeptical of anyone that's different. It's not just skin color. Anyone that
No,
comes into a town that's different is going to
different.
get racism. Where it's wired into human DNA to be very cautious of people you don't know,
Yep. Yep.
especially if they represent a group. If they're a
Yeah, it's
tribe down the road, are they going to take my land? Are they going to kick me out of my cave? What's going on down there?
yeah.
So you can see how it happens from an anthropological perspective. I want to just touch on, before we get back into some of the questions I've got for you, fascinating character. You touched on him earlier. I've read a little bit about him and find him to be intriguing, the Charles Fitch. And he
Oh, yeah.
died apparently just before and he was very involved in the Millerite movement. I
Yep.
don't think he knew Ellen, but Ellen was very inspired and influenced by him. But Charles Fitch was part of the Millerite movement, and he died just before October 22,
That's right.
1844. Can you just share a little bit about him?
Sure. He was a prominent Congregationalist minister, and he gets involved in the free church movement, and sort of is objecting to the pew rents system. Most people don't realize probably that the tithing system that is often practiced in Christianity was really created in the 19th century. Before that time, Catholics are using indulgences and other kinds of stuff. Really, the early church was holding everything in common. So socialism is kind of there as the norm for several hundred years in early Christianity. As the papacy arises, then you have things like indulgences and all of this kind of stuff that comes in as a way to fund the church. And when Protestantism comes on the scene, state churches emerge. And so the state is funding religion and the clergy and all the churches, etc. And whenever this comes to America, state churches are the way that everything's funded as well, until the Revolution and the First Amendment. And this comes with the disestablishment. And the states are going to slowly ratify that. And by 1833, Massachusetts becomes the last state to formally disestablish religion. And so as that happens, a system known as pew renting comes into to support the churches and the clergy, which meant that people had to pay for their seat. And they usually rented it for 1 year, and they were expensive. And that meant that poor people really couldn't attend. And if they attended church, there was a couple of free seats in the back corner somewhere, but most often they're having to listen from the outside of a church through open windows. And so in the early 19th century, you have several Protestants who are pushing for the church to be free. And so they start to do that, and they develop a system called systematic benevolence that wasn't an Adventist
Mm.
invention.
No,
A lot of people
interesting.
think it was.
Yeah, I
It was
did.
not. And so they come up with systematic benevolence as a way to sort of help free themselves so that the poor can come and worship in a church. And then slowly, well, actually, not even that slowly, fairly quickly, systematic benevolence ends up getting molded and reinvented into the tithing system that we know of, a 10% sort of model. And so Charles Fitch is involved as a reformer in the free church movement. He knows people like Charles Finney.
Oh,
And in fact, he will preach a sermon where Charles Finney is installed as a minister of a church. So he's pretty prominent in New England, especially Massachusetts. And he becomes an abolitionist. And overnight, basically, after he becomes an abolitionist, he becomes a very prominent one because he was already known as such an eloquent speaker. And that's one thing about Charles Fitch. Fitch, even if you didn't like him or disagreed with what he said, everyone out there, including critics, said he is really eloquent.
right.
He was the Millerite Chrysostom, which is the Greek word for golden tongue.
Mm.
And so he was a very eloquent speaker and just moved audiences and had a tremendous influence. And so whenever he becomes a Millerite, he instantly becomes a sensation within that movement. Through his influence, I show in my book, he was one of the most influential abolitionists in America, and he's been overlooked by historians. But he leads the largest wave of anti-slavery come-outerism in American history, as well as helping to establish disunionism as a major anti-slavery tactic, which helped make Garrison who he was. And so he was a very influential person. Yes, he does believe that Jesus is coming, in 1844. And yet he is still active in the anti-slavery movement. In February 1844, just a month or so, he believes Christ is coming, and they had the spring disappointment. He is helping to organize a Liberty Party association to rally anti-slavery voters in the state of Ohio. And so he does that in February 1844, and he's very active all the way till the very end. But he is baptizing a bunch of people in Lake Erie in early October 1844. He gets very sick from this, and he ends up dying 10 days or something like this before the Great Disappointment. And so that was a tragic loss, but reportedly his wife didn't cry because she says we're about to be reunited with him.
Yeah.
And
How she
that
felt
never
later.
yeah, that never happened.
Is there any follow-up comments from her?
I don't know what happens to her after all of this. Some of Charles Fitch's descendants, including his daughter, what's her name? Esther. She becomes a Seventh-day Adventist. And the reason we have a photograph of or an image of Charles Fitch is because she had the oil painting done of her father. And it was Arthur Spalding, of all people, who somehow connected with her in the early 1900s. And he was allowed to photograph that picture. And she gave him Charles Fitch's diaries and a bunch of his correspondence, which we now hold here at the archive where I'm at.
Far out. That'd be an
Yeah.
interesting show just looking at those. Maybe
No, it's great. And they've been digitized. And so you can see them on the Adventist Digital Library. But you mentioned, Peter, Ellen White's fascination with Fitch, and that's very true.
Yes, yeah.
Because it was her first or maybe second or third vision where she sees him as going to be in heaven.
Yeah.
And she names him in vision, and along with Levi Stockman, who had done a lot to convert her to Christianity. And he also dies in, was it 1844? He dies before the disappointment, at least.
As well, yeah. Wow.
So, yeah.
Fascinating.
He's a fascinating figure.
Yeah.
Very fascinating.
Again, when you look into showmanship, and I'm not saying that implementing showmanship tricks in any way invalidates the person being on the stage.
Sure.
But you can look to people, say, for example, Billy Graham, who for sure would have researched some, ways of how to be a better
speaker.
Yeah. And let's time it right. There's all sorts of timing in showmanship. But I believe he was someone that really led an exemplary life. Same with Des Ford. I mean, you go and listen to that. I'm sure you have many times. The October 27, 1979, where Irwin would have been in the audience, Irwin Gain, and would have been very unhappy with it.
I'm sure.
Those watching, Irwin Gain very much opposed to Des Ford. His son, Ron Gain, married Sarah. Sarah is the sister of Malcolm.
No, not quite. Roy married Connie.
Connie,
Yeah,
and Sarah
then
is your
they
wife.
had Sarah, who's my wife.
Yes, I'll get it right.
No worries. It's all
And
good.
that's the connection there. But here we are, October 27. I'm sure Irwin was in the front row.
Probably. No idea.
That when you listen to that 1 hour, it's absolutely Des Ford. He has got that gift that I think Charles Fitch had.
He was really charismatic, right?
Incredibly charismatic.
Yeah.
When I interviewed him on season 1, the first, I divided it into 3. So it's SDAQ&A season 1 only on podcast, divided it into episode 1, 2, and 3. And at the end of the 3rd one, I asked him to share his love of the gospel. And I think it's an 11-minute. I've put it up as the 11-minute gospel. I think it's called that. And honestly, he would have been sitting 1.5 meters maximum away from me. And his charisma that whole afternoon of our 4 hours of discussions, and Gillian was just off to the side, and lucky she had her iPad and videoed it. It was like electrifying, goosebumps, the way he spoke. And even though he was implementing a skilled way to speak and tell a story that I think he's done a PhD on how to do that. I think his first PhD.
He did study rhetoric, didn't he?
Yes, on rhetoric. Yeah,
I think so.
It doesn't take away from the genuineness of the human. And when we look at Martin Luther King, deeply flawed, with there's allegations of plagiarism, very, very inappropriate sexual misconduct. Again, not in the illegal sense. I'm not making those allegations, but you look at Luther and his thoughts about the Jewish community. These people are flawed. They had skills. There was showmanship. There was a milieu of kind of this ether of following these charismatic people. The difference is that they didn't claim. They might have claimed God inspired them, etc. And they, in spite of their flaws, did incredible things. Ellen is in that same category, I think, but she claims that God gave her special messages for the end of times. That's where I kind of go, yeah, this is why I think you fall into the false prophet category. But where I was going with all of that was to bring up a question again from Christina, and thank you. And she says the GC doesn't encourage social justice activism, or they are against this being preached from pulpit, like Claudia, an SDA pastor who got backlash for standing up against discrimination. What are your thoughts on that current? We've talked about historical way back to the setting of your book, right up to now, to the 60s and 70s. She's referring to right now. There appears to be a lack of an ability for people to speak up. What are your thoughts on that?
I have many. Yeah, Claudia's a good friend of mine. And so I know what they're talking about. I can't remember who made the comment or asked the question, but Claudia is a good friend of mine. And there is definitely a sizable contingent of Adventists, especially some in key positions of leadership, who very much don't want to hear what I share in this book, which is that social justice was a core part of the very warp and woof of the rise of Adventism, and so in fact it was so intimately connected that you cannot separate them.
Right.
And that doesn't sit well, because there's a lot of people in the church today who say, yep, you got to stay silent, you got to avoid politics, you got to just sit by and not get involved. And that's a big misunderstanding of Adventism. It's a big misunderstanding of Adventist history. It's a big misunderstanding of Ellen White, even. The pioneers did believe that you should avoid a party loyalty, like a deep partisan loyalty that could sort of blind you to spiritual matters. But they were very involved, and Adventists have always been very involved in politics. It just often gets disguised with a different name, like religious liberty. For
Yes, yeah, that's
okay, but we fought all the way up in the Supreme Court for religious liberty. This is politics, right?
Yeah.
Temperance, politics.
Mm.
Get into all kinds of stuff with health reform, politics.
Yeah.
Our crusades against tobacco. This is politics, right? And so the thing is, though, is that Adventists recognize that political issues, they have a moral dimension to them, right? And so there is no clean answer like, here is politics, you avoid it. Here is the okay stuff. Even the idea that you can sort of bifurcate life and have like your religious and secular life is separate. That's a new sort of idea that really didn't emerge until roughly the Protestant Reformation. Life before this time is just all one thing. And you ask someone like the Apostle Paul, if there's a separation of church and state, or, something like that's not even in their consciousness. They're not thinking in those kinds of terms at all. These are modern ideas.
Yeah.
So, I think the pioneers recognized, even if they didn't like to call it politics, they recognized that they had to be socially engaged, and they were frenetically so. Like petitioning or other kinds of preaching, definitely, and other kinds of ways to speak out. They were anything but silent.
Yeah. I want to come to Nathan Brown, who I've interviewed with this particular book, and I'm sure you do know him.
Yeah.
Practicing Justice. I'll come to that in a moment. I just want to bring another question, another comment on just before it disappears off the chat there. John writes, it is good to remember that the Lake Region Conference of SDAs began after the 1943 death of Lucy Bayard, a black Adventist denied treatment at a white SDA sanitarium due to race. This impelled the blacks.
100%. Yep, she dies at the hospital at Howard University now. She was denied entry at the Washington Sanitarium. That's a tragic story, and that is the final straw that breaks the camel's back that leads to the formation of regional conferences in America. Yep. Benjamin Baker has written an updated, he's done a deeper dive on that, and it's got a great article, or several of them, in fact, on Lucy Bayard. It had been thought for a long time that she died almost immediately, or like even some people said in the hallways of the Washington Sanitarium. That didn't happen. She died a month or 2 or 3 later. And so it wasn't quite immediate. But regardless, the point of the story is very true. Her death is the final straw that breaks that camel's back. I'd also point your viewers to the great book by Douglas Morgan called Change Agents, which tells the story of regional conferences in such great detail. There's also the great work by Calvin Rock, Protest in Progress, that came out a little before Doug's book did. So there's some good literature on this.
So just to the Nathan Brown.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. Another friend of mine, Brandon Valiant, who runs Border Church up on the Queensland, New South Wales border, and people can check that out as well. People can check out Nathan's book. When these two guys chat about this topic of social justice, they are at loggerheads, but they both are, ideologically speaking, Adventist apologists in many ways. They may disagree with that, but that's my assessment. This kind of division can be seen right through Adventism.
Oh,
And
yeah.
as you say, there's no longer this understanding of an enmeshment of theology and politics. It's very divisive now. And I noticed with the
Yeah.
Charlie Kirk and
Mhm.
the Sabbath kind of connection there, that's polarized Adventists. They seem to misuse a lot of data, both sides, I say, and are almost at war with each other. There's a
Mm.
hatred. You look at the whole Conrad Vine, Ron Kelly, those guys, and is it the Michigan
Michigan Conference. Yeah. No,
Conference?
that's
These
my
guys are
conference.
at war, all
Yeah.
essentially over theology and politics and understandings of it. Can you just share a little bit of light onto that? I'll just quickly read one of my other questions that I wrote down because I think
Wow.
it. Um,
Mm.
oh no, I'll come back to that. It's a little bit dovetail to that. But what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, that's such a big such a big question, and you're drawing attention to such a big problem. And it's not a unique problem to Adventism for sure. I think we were talking about problems with just humanity, and I see this as part of this. The stuff with Ron Kelly and Conrad Vine. I disagree with them on a lot of issues. Their positions on COVID and masks and all of this, as well as their positions on women and race, I very much disagree with them. And yet, the reason or the thing that sort of really brought them over the edge was about money. And so that's just a very old story. That's a very old story. Coming back down to money. And we see that throughout all of history, I think, or at least since we have, modern techniques or more modern things like farming that sort of really divide society into the haves and have-nots. You really start to see that remains that story about the haves and have-nots, and class is a term that rises with Marx, and yet that is the issue that has probably divided society throughout all of history, more than anything else. It
Mm,
always comes down to money. And so, yeah, I think it's tragic that has to be the reason, or at least a driving major force, that or you won't act until it's about that. It's like, well,
yeah,
were there problems before? I mean, I'm not gonna weigh in on that or whatever, but, like, there are people who say there's problems before, but then you don't do anything until there's the money.
yeah,
So, to me, I see it as a lot of these things are we are allowing all of the noise to crowd out our willingness to listen,
mm,
our
mm,
willingness to set aside our own views and just talk to
mm.
someone else and
Mm,
see what's going on. And, like, maybe they have a perspective here you haven't considered. Maybe they've got a point that you need to
agree.
hear because it will help broaden your perspective.
Mm,
Um, I think one of the most arrogant things that any of us can do is assume that we've got it all figured out.
yeah, yeah,
And I think that ultimately these things come down to those kinds of things. And when you get money in the mix, it makes it even more uh, polarizing and electric, as far as attracting attention. And I guess it just makes me sad, but I'm also not surprised because
yeah,
feminists are human too.
yeah, exactly.
So
Money and legal action.
yeah, they always
I,
go together.
I'm going to try and get Nathan and Brendan on the show together because I'm all about trying to have a civil discussion, even though I
Yeah,
have some quite robust
sure.
differences of opinion and I'm happy to share them. Um, but it's like this kind of spectrum that once you get too far in opposition to someone, it's like a red mist comes across your eyes, and it's you can't just speak straight anymore. And
Yeah.
it'll be an interesting sociological happening if I can get Brendan and Nathan to
Mm,
actually converse without starting to
mm.
fight. So the next question is a little bit along those lines,
Mhm.
but there are some things we can extract from it that are a little bit more nuanced. Early Adventists often seemed deeply engaged with issues like slavery, religious liberty, social reform, the things we're just speaking of. Yet
Mhm.
many modern Adventists, as we are speaking about now, are suspicious of anything that sounds like a social justice movement.
Yep.
Just dig in a little bit more about how did that shift happen?
Right. This is the number one question that I always get asked every time I speak everywhere. So,
Mm,
yeah, happy to talk about it. Um, basically what we see is we see America changing and we see the Adventist church changing. And so for a while, after the Civil War, America and the Republicans, the radical Republicans and Black Americans, they have a period of a few years where they start to really gain ground. There is civil rights legislation that's passed, the 13th, 14th, 15th Amendment, and you have Black people elected even in the South to positions of power. Um, but in 1876, there's a difficult election process that comes up, and the Republicans can't win and they can't beat the Democrats, right? And so at this time, and the parties have definitely shifted over time, but at this time, the Republicans were the party that was uh, more okay with social justice, and the Democrats were not when it came to race. And so the Republicans lost, or they didn't fully win. Rutherford B. Hayes ends up striking a deal where the Democrats will help. They'll make a compromise, and the Republicans will win the presidency if they agree to withdraw federal troops from the American South. And so this ends what we call the radical reconstruction period in American history. And very quickly, all the gains that had been made in the South, they go away, and things become very bad, and in some ways even worse than they had been with slavery. It's almost like vengeance is on the minds of the white majority, and old Confederate soldiers and so forth are being put in positions of power. This has got a name. It's called the Nadir period. By some historians, it's also called the rise of Jim Crow, which is about racial segregation. So America is changing, and the color line is being drawn fast and hard. And the Adventists are trying to evangelize the South during this period, and that's very challenging for them. And so before they had gone south to evangelize, there is no evidence of racial segregation in the Adventist church. In fact, quite the opposite. You see numerous sources showing that they didn't racially segregate. And you also see that they reject things like the so-called curse of Canaan or myth of Ham, which is this racist reading of Genesis 9 that says that Black people are the descendants of Canaan, who was this descendant of Ham and who was cursed and so forth because of the drunkenness of Noah and everything. And Adventists rejected that, but they ended up ultimately adopting that view by the early 20th century. And so there's an ideological and somewhat theological kind of shift that's happening on certain of these questions. And so as they go down into the South, Adventists are evangelizing the South, and they've initially tried to avoid racial segregation there. You can read my article on Joseph Clark in the Encyclopedia of Seventh-day Adventists. He and his wife, Sarah, go down to the Denison, Texas area where Southwestern Adventist University is roughly at. And they refused to racially segregate. And they survived there for 16 months. But then both white and Black Adventists are begging them to segregate their services for their very survival. And the Clarks can't. They refuse. And so they leave. They go elsewhere. And in the wake of that, Robert Kilgore will start segregating services there, and segregation will sweep the South. And that will become the way to do it. And that will slowly creep north. You see the General Conference moving to Washington, D.C. from Battle Creek in 1901 and 3, and that period of time due to the fires there. And the president, Arthur Daniels, wants to make the church there the model on race relations, and it was racially integrated. but he wanted to force that integrated church to segregate and make the model for going forward segregation. He wanted a white church and a black church. And so he tried to force that. Douglas Morgan has written on this in his book, his biography of Lewis Sheaf, and also his history of the first church in Washington. And what ends up happening is 3 churches. And so you end up having a minority of whites, a half a dozen or so, who hold on with a small group of black Adventists, and they stay together. And then you have the white church and the black church, and you have 3 churches there. And so it rips apart Adventism in that region, the headquarters of the church. And there is some racial schisms that come out of this, et cetera. And Lewis Sheaf will ultimately leave the Adventist church. So segregation continues to creep up north, and it's in 1932 that the Battle Creek Church finally splits along racial lines, and it's just entrenched by this point.
Wow.
Other things going on in America, the rise of the fundamentalist movement is happening at this time, and Adventists are starting to be called a cult for the first time by these conservative Christians, and they don't want to ally themselves with the evolutionists, the so-called modernists. And so they try to cozy up to the very groups of Christians that they had abandoned in the 1840s because of slavery and racism and so forth. And so as those conservative evangelicals start calling Adventists a cult, they get offended, and they start to respond and say, no, we are fundamentalists. In fact, we are the fundamentalists of the fundamentalists. And so they try to assert this, and they largely do this by aligning on as many theological issues as they can, as well as the social issues. And so you start to see Adventists, especially by this time period, really embracing very conservative views on gender and race. When Ellen White dies in 1915, for example, you had hundreds of women in positions of power in the Adventist church, and by 1940 there are 0. And so there's a dramatic cleansing of the ranks and so forth. And they do this through new policies. We see for the first time that ordination is explicitly restricted to men. It was open before that. And we see new policies saying that in order for certain positions to be held, they have to be held by an ordained person.
Yeah.
So that just cuts women out, right? And so the thing is that nothing is stagnant in this world. Every kind of movement, every kind of religions are not immune. They always change. And the people who are living in the current moment, they always are going to tell you, oh, we're sticking to the truth. Well, sure. It's because they're wanting to defend what their particular understanding of that is. But historians, we mess things up for people because we talk about how things really were, and we say, well, hey, wait a second. The past wasn't always as rosy as you thought it was, but it also wasn't as bad either.
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of a mixed bag. And anyhow, I guess the long and short of it is it's complex. Adventism changed over time. Racism becomes structural part of the Adventist church, and the remnants of that are very much still alive in the church today. Racism is a problem on virtually every continent, and the church has not been vocal enough about addressing this problem. We've spent more time fighting other issues. But racism is something that, everyone's going to tell you it's bad. But then when it comes to actually trying to correct it, there seems to be little intentionality put behind it to actually try to eradicate this and help Adventism, maybe be more on the positive side again.
Yeah. I think that's one of the good positions an Adventist historian can take on, where you're revealing more accurately what went on, but you're also not throwing it all out. And I really like one of my favorite Adventist historians is Gil Valentine, and his book Ostriches and Canaries.
Yeah, it's a great book.
It's just incredible. And what I find hard for me, having grown up and being largely just a lay person in the Adventist church, though I had music ministry, these guys, the Adventist historians, blew my mind about, the faults and flaws of Adventism, and it would blow me out of the water. And then they'd be like, "Oh, but it's okay because blah 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 blah," and I'm like, "Oh, I can't cope with that." And
Well,
then
they're
and then
human.
yeah, and then
These
I'd
people are
read
human. Shocker, I know.
and then I later on after I read Ron Numbers' prophetess book, I
Mhm.
then built up the courage to read The White Lie,
Mhm.
and
Mhm.
and that I was able to kind of process it a lot more as I was a bit older.
Well,
And
you
I
guys
had
had virtually nothing to help prepare you for those books back then. I mean,
no,
it
just
was kinda like a lightning bolt
it,
out of a clear blue sky.
incredible, yeah. And there was a
Yeah.
massive amount of action and material
Mhm.
in the early 80s, and then in
Yep.
the early 90s here in Australia, it was just rebooted. But then you'd read, Adventist
The
apologist
White Truth. Yeah.
replies, I think he was involved, wasn't he director of the White Estate or something?
I
Uh,
don't know. I have
John
the book. I've
Robertson.
actually read it.
But this
Um, but yeah.
this one rose made even me question the church even more, that I found it more troubling, raising
Mm.
more questions than answering than Walter Ray's book. Um,
Yeah, there is some really bad apologetic work out there, and the arguments in a lot of these books are really bad. They're just
yeah,
really shoddy. Um, yeah, so I get what you're saying there. I mean, yeah, I there are some really bad, defenses out there, and
yeah.
it's like, wow, there's a lot of special pleading, and it's like, yeah, but
So as an Adventist historian, do you ever feel tension between following the historical evidence wherever it leads
mm.
and protecting your cherished denominational narratives?
That's a great question. I'm not aware of it if I do. I'm not aware of it if I do. My position has always been since I've started getting into scholarship, I mean, 15, closer to 20 years ago, um, is that I want to follow the truth and the evidence wherever it leads. I don't have any. I mean, I'm an Adventist. I work for the church. I believe the beliefs in general of the church and everything, and all of those things, and yet my loyalty is to the truth. So when I'm searching for evidence or things in the past, I'm not concerned about trying to protect or preserve my beliefs, but I will test them. And I've had to adjust my understandings of things. I mean, I'm sure I used to I probably thought that all of the words of Ellen White were directly from God himself at some point,
Yeah.
and understanding her the way the visions functioned and how she researched and fill in gaps and all of this kind of stuff. I've had to adjust my thinking, but I think because a lot of that road had been plowed, or that ground had been plowed before I came on the scene. I
Mm.
don't think it disrupted, and I don't think it disrupts my generation as much as it may have done for yours.
No.
Um, there was a lot of work out there that had been done to sort of routinize it and say, well, okay, we now know, but I've gone through and I've listened to
Yeah.
like Arthur White and Bob Olson of the White Estate saying that Walter Ray's book shocked them because they had never heard these things before,
Mm.
and I'm sure it must have been really hard for people in that period of time.
Mm.
But when you recognize that this is just the way she did it, it's not, I don't see it as a traumatizing thing.
I think,
Um,
the generation after me, so
mhm.
I'm not officially a baby boomer. I'm
Mm.
I'm in a small group called Baby Buster that
Okay.
that just follows on from the boomers, but
Yeah.
not quite Gen X.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's an interesting, generation because, I would have only been 6 or something at Woodstock. I don't you can't I
Yeah.
don't think you can truly claim to be a part of a culture or a generation if you weren't able to be at Woodstock. You're not a boomer. Um, but but, um,
Now
but
we know the dividing line.
yeah, that's the dividing line, Woodstock 1969. If you were 16 and you could have gone, you're a boomer.
There you
Um,
go. There you go.
it I think my generation were as shocked as the boomers,
Mm.
but I don't think the next generation, the Gen X and the millennials, were better equipped to cope with it and therefore were less impacted, I think it was covered up again. And when I
Well,
started SDAQ&A,
sure.
10 years ago,
Yep.
I was still an Adventist, or it might have been 11 years ago.
Yeah.
I had a big chat with a bunch of Adventist youth from all around the country that were all gathering at Avondale College at the time. It's university now.
Mhm.
And there was maybe 30 of us just having a conversation about Adventism, and we were talking about music and culture, and I thought, wow, these guys know nothing about Adventist theology.
Mm.
They're just cultural Adventists.
Mhm.
And they've bypassed all the Des Ford stuff. They've bypassed all the white lie. They've bypassed it,
Yeah.
not because of ignorance. They were ignorant, but not because of lack of intelligence. The
Sure.
church was still very good at covering up this stuff. And
Yeah.
I asked them some questions. They'd never heard of Des Ford. They'd
Mm.
never heard of Bob Wolfgram. They'd never heard of the investigative judgment, the only distinctive Adventist doctrine. They weren't even too
Yeah.
sure on what happened in 1844. They
Sure.
just loved haystacks, Jesus, worship. And so I feel like what's happening today with work that you're doing, work that Matthew Lucio is doing, myself, others, you can't hide it anymore. So
Oh, sure.
the interesting generation coming up are the is it the Zoomers or whatever, the post 2000, well, probably even later than that now, born Adventist babies.
Mhm.
They are getting informed, but what's happening is they're leaving. When they find the information, they're gone. And
Hmm.
the Adventist likes to claim it's about 40% youth loss. The
Oh.
reality is it's probably closer to 60% or higher.
Mm.
And so I think it's an important thing for Adventists to do, to become aware of all of this historical evidence,
Mhm.
but to have guys like you say, "Hey, I'm still an Adventist, and let's talk about it." But what tends to happen is you guys speak up, and you know, as every show lately I do, you speak up and you get cancelled. Now, it means that the readership, more people love trying to find it and read it, but the influence of good people like yourself and Gil Valentine and John Butler and all these guys is still quite successfully being covered up, because whenever you speak up, you get shut down. How does that make you feel? And what do you think of the ramifications of that are within the church? Why
Yeah.
won't leadership ever change? They've been doing that since Canwright.
You know, I don't think the appropriate response to a book is to ever ban it. And so I'm very disappointed in how things were handled with that book. Um, you know, I don't know. Peter, I don't know. Some days it can be hard and you're like, "Do is there any intellectual freedom?" But I still, even though that book and there's other evidences of things, there are definitely people who, they'll shut down this book because they don't like it or whatever, and they have the power to do it. It happens. It does. Not every day, but it happens. And I guess I've just decided that I'm here, I'm going to do my thing, and I'm going to do it as long as I am called by God to do it. And if I ever run into trouble over whatever, because I can't be honest anymore, then that's where I just find employment elsewhere.
Yeah, good.
I mean, I'm just not going to worry about it, I guess is what it's coming down to it. I'm loyal to God, I'm loyal to Christ, I'm loyal to seeking truth and following the evidence where it leads. And so far I can do that and remain a faithful Adventist. But if it ever got to the point where I felt like I couldn't, well, of course, you
Yeah.
just follow your conscience.
Yeah, exactly. I think I was able to I could have remained an Adventist to this day, but
Mm,
I couldn't go against my conscience.
You
And
can't,
that
right?
doesn't mean I'm judging anyone else that's still an Adventist. I'm not judging their conscience and their decisions. Not at all. It's a personal decision.
Sure.
And for me, when I woke up one morning and thought, oh, hang on, I can't
Yeah,
in all good conscience put my name to that anymore.
sure.
Um,
And it's reciprocal for me, Peter. No problem for you
yeah,
making a different choice than I have. It's
I
you
love
gotta
that.
follow your
I,
conscience, you gotta follow the God's leading and
exactly.
guiding,
Yeah.
and that may take you somewhere else, and that's if you're following God, then you're in the right place.
And
Um,
if you've watched me in the last 2 years, I've been getting more and more frustrated with the good guys, the progressive Adventists, the liberal Adventists, even some
mm,
of the historians. But it all came to a head really in my 2 conversations with Reinder Bruinsma.
mm,
First one, I was going off at him, and people were using words like, "Oh, you're hammering him," and stuff like that. He's Dutch. He was totally able to cope with it, and I knew it because we'd chatted off air. He'd been on the show a few
mm,
times. But it was like the pinnacle of my frustration with the progressives, who are the only group that seem to refuse to have any sense of accountability.
hmm,
I don't care if the traditional Adventists don't have accountability. They've got a rock solid, I'm right, you're wrong. So go for it. I'm not even judging the cultural Adventists. Good on you.
mm,
Love your haystacks. Happy Sabbath. You're doing great local community work. I have no problem with cultural Adventists. Leadership, I'm like, guys, stop playing both sides. That's what I think you're doing.
mm,
So those 3 groups, and they maybe they don't have accountability, but they don't even really claim to be doing anything that requires overt accountability, because they really believe in what they're doing. Perhaps
mm,
leadership is a bit doubtful, but their job is to be political, not accountable. However, the progressives, I feel they should know better. I feel like that they've had this sense of information and a weakness that when they speak up, like you're one of the very few currently employed Adventists who are willing now to come on the show. And so it peaked for me in that interview where I was allegedly hammering Bruinsma, because I felt like, you guys, I'm so sick of all your talk, all your false hope, all, anyway, I got it off my chest. He came back on the show the next week. We had the most amazing civil conversation. Interesting to note that the
mm.
first interview where I was hammering, within 5 hours, had 6,000 views.
Oh, wow. Well,
The
people
second
love that
one
kind
the
of stuff,
second
I
one I
guess.
don't even think has reached 1,000 yet, 4 weeks
Yeah,
later. So
people
and
love controversy
yeah,
for whatever reason. It's sad, right? I mean, this is why Trump can have all the
yeah,
attention of the world. I mean,
with
it's
one word, with a sentence. But I
yeah.
guess where I'm going with that is I'm now coming down from that mountain peak, and
Mm,
I'm once again enjoying this kind of conversation where I'm back at peace with myself, where
that's good.
people can make whatever decisions they wanna make. Let's have a coffee and chat about it,
Mhm,
and I'm fine with it again, and I'm glad that I've had that. uh, I'm glad that was cajoling and chastising the progressives. They
mm,
needed to kick up the butt. Whether they do anything about it, whether they network, whether they are proud and be bold, or whether they continue to be suppressed and not realize they are, I don't mind. It's not, but I'm glad I went through the process, and it's making. That's why I was so excited when Malcolm suggested you come on the show, and I was like, really? Would you think he would? And that you have, because I think it's this kind of dialogue that gets, like someone just wrote earlier that they'd never even heard of Des Ford till they watched this show,
well,
and
sure.
they've been an Adventist. So
Yeah,
these are topics that I think are important and healthy for young people or any Adventist to have, to give them information that they can move forward with. And I honestly do hope that people like yourself and progressive Adventists that want to see things in context, and a lot of the reclaiming the prophet guys, I do genuinely hope that when they reveal information, instead of losing 60% of young Adventists, it drops to a more normal 30 or 40, more in alignment perhaps with other Protestant movements. But I do think it's not. I think something more has to happen than just revealing the information and just offering maybe things are going to change. I'm sticking in and I'm going to help make a change. That's
Mm.
nice sentiment, but it
Mhm.
requires action. So
Mhm.
I'm now removing myself from the cajoling position and just saying, well,
Mhm.
my opinion is you need to take action. If you do or you don't, that's fine. But if
This
you
is
were,
the same debate that was happening in the abolitionist movement, by the way.
yes.
So, Peter, you're the come outer. Okay, you're the come outer who has said you can't reform by staying inside. You got to do it from the outside. And these
Mm,
progressives, to use your word, they're the guys who say, no, you have to stay inside. You can do more good to reform if you're on the inside. That is a key debate that divided the abolitionists.
wow.
And I think it divides a lot of reformers or people who have common cause, and it
Yeah,
has throughout a lot of history.
yeah. I wonder why. Like I can totally watch Trump, Charlie Kirk, Doug Batchelor, Conrad Vine, Ron Kelly. Ron Kelly's been on the show,
Mm,
and be totally fine with finding common ground, and I don't get offended. My identity is not, smacked
mhm.
in the face. I don't know why so few people are like that. It must be in genetic or something. I just I'm not wired to be offended.
Yeah, that's good. It's I don't know why. But I guess people feel threatened maybe, or they feel too uptight, or I don't know. I personally love conversation. I
I
love
know.
to just talk about things, and
Yeah.
I'm not worried
No.
or
Well,
offended or scared. It's like, let's just
Malcolm
talk about it. It's in
yeah,
your head. Let's bring it out and discuss it, because
exactly.
obviously it's there for a purpose. And why act like these questions don't exist?
Yeah,
That doesn't seem like a good approach at all. We're not going to get anywhere that way.
no. Well, Malcolm said you and I would, get on like a house on fire, so that, I think that's proving true. And I don't even know why when I interviewed Ron Numbers and John Butler at the same time,
Yeah, I
and
did
I
too.
liked both
Yeah.
of them, and I'm so
Mhm.
sad when Ron passed. It really affected me. Um,
Mm.
but I wanna push back against John Butler more than Ron Numbers. It's like so the only I don't know what it is. I'll have to research that in my brain. But if let's say if you had a bit more, influence, if you could correct one widespread misunderstanding that Adventists have about their own history, what would it be?
Boy, that's a good question. I care so much about racial justice, Peter. That has been my shtick for a long time, and part of the reason is because I grew up racist and didn't realize it. And
Wow.
so, yeah, so it's very personal to me. And I as I studied Black history, as I studied the history of race and racism, and those are all three different things. Um, then I just started to realize that I had just misunderstood so much, and this is a crucial issue that deals with every single living soul, single living person. Race is, of course, a socially constructed concept that's fairly recent in its origin, and yet it's applied to people's bodies. And so there's a reality that's unavoidable and inescapable. And so people assume and connect it with the body, and everybody has a body. So, to be honest, the thing that I would love to see change the most is I would love to see Adventism, which is proud to champion this sort of feather in its cap as the most racially diverse religion in America, if not the world. And I would love to see them stop, using, like that as a wonderful way to give a self pat on the back, and actually be a driving and leading voice for positive change in the world. And I think that's a kind of message that everyone can get behind, regardless of what you believe in your theology and your doctrine. And so, to be perfectly blunt, I'll say it this way: I care much more about what you might call orthopraxy than orthodoxy, and I think Jesus did too. I think he cared a lot more about how we lived and how we treated other people than he did about what we believed. And just look at it. I mean, in the book of James, James says even the demons believe, and then they shudder with fear. So, I mean, if we keep everything into the realm of theology and ideology, but we don't let that change the way we actually live our lives, to where everything that we are striving to do is about trying to make the person next to you or in front of you feel more loved and accepted and empowered to do good things in this world, then I think our theology, whatever it is an absolute failure. Absolute failure. And so the thing that I care the most is really that we can recognize that we have a positive history, at least in the early years, on these issues of race, and that can be channeled and championed to try to make positive change for the whole world today. Will that happen? Probably not. Should it happen? Absolutely.
Mm.
But I would love to see Adventists recognize that in order to be a true Christian, you have to truly love everyone, and that requires action and backing up what you say you believe with
Mm.
tangible, lived care and justice for the least of these. That's it
Yeah.
for me.
Yeah. And I think I've discovered that if you do speak up, you're gonna get it. You're gonna get it. You're gonna slap. There's gonna be someone out there, like
I
someone
have my
someone just
share. I
oh, I
have my
bet you
share of
do. I
critics.
bet you do, and I wanted to close in a few minutes with some of the backlash you've had, but
Mm,
someone here has just written, "Oh, why do former SDAs start channels and are angry about being former SDA? Seems to me a lot of healing needs to take place, and they're just negative, and they're trapped in their anger." See, to me, that's an example of we're having a conversation. That person wants to throw barbs and ad hominem attacks, totally
mm.
misrepresenting, breaking the ninth commandment, and par for the course. But the reason I bring that up is that, yes, if you are going to speak up for what you believe in, and progressive Adventists, if this is you, you will get pushed back, you will be shut down. And look at what happened after Des Ford. Anyone who spoke up in support of him lost their job. It became a question. If you were seeking employment within the Adventist church, where do you stand on Des Ford? From 1981 onwards, countless Adventist teachers, nurses, theologians, pastors were asked that question for several years. Where do you
The litmus
stand on
test.
the Des Ford thing? And if you and that, I have countless stories of them talking to me and sharing about, and how cleverly they were able to avoid that question. I'm like, what? You know,
Mm.
this is not a badge of honor you should be wearing. That shows your weakness. And to be fair, what an interesting time, the 70s and 80s and 60s within Adventism. And these guys back then were just surviving and fighting for their lives. And I make no judgment on Adventist progressives from the last 46 years until now. And my judgment now is one that I will be holding more quietly. Your research suggests that expectation of Christ's soon return motivated social reform rather than discouraging it. This is the apocalyptic nature of your book. If that's true, should modern Adventists be more engaged with issues like poverty, racism, immigration, and justice than they currently are? And maybe some of them are.
Yeah, I think they should. That's my opinion and my take. I I'm a historian and I'm writing about the past, and yet it's impossible for me not to be affected by my own work. And I've changed a lot through my own book here and my own
Mm.
research. It's about a decade of my life into that project, and I'm a very different person than when I started. When I first a huge transformative thing for me was finding that Joseph Bates, while he's an Adventist and even a Sabbath keeper, is signing and circulating petitions to abolish slavery, yes, but also to do things like to end Jim Crow racial segregation and to legalize interracial marriage and all of this kind of stuff. And I was very surprised. And I said, well, if one of the founders of the Adventist Church is doing that, then what am I doing? and I found that to be inspiring. And so the people I encountered have inspired me and challenged me, and I
Mm,
hope they can do that for other people too.
mm,
But Adventism is not unique in the sense that it's got its troubles, right? I mean, look at the Baptist church who just put a
yeah,
moratorium on women pastors,
yeah,
the Southern Baptist Convention, right? So, I mean, this you mentioned about the reactions and so forth. Progressives are getting it in any conservative religion. That's just the way it goes. And
yeah,
it shifts if the power dynamics shift, it shifts with it, because it can go the other way too. But it's
yeah.
life, I guess.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. Yeah. I guess from my perspective, I do see, and I've chatted to Bob Wolfgram and Rick Foray,
Mm,
both PhD, know way more about sociological anthropological understandings than I ever will.
mm,
But I feel like some movements come along, and while they do a lot of good, they're less benign than other Protestant movements.
mm,
Though what you just said about that Baptist edict, they now to me are moving into more of that's a bit dangerous kind of area. So it's a little bit like here's your most benign movements, and every again there's a spike. And
mhm,
Adventism, I think, and Mormonism and Jehovah's Witnesses, they tend to spike towards um, activities and beliefs and ideologies that can harm people.
mm.
Um, Someone has just said it's Michael C. I'm not sure if that's Michael, your Michael, but they've said I can't, it's not coming up on the screen. There we go. You appear to SDAQ&A. They're asking me. You appear to support the church's involvement in social justice issues. Homosexuality is a social issue. Do you support SDA gay pastors? One just retired with his gay wife in SoCal. I think you're putting together a few threads there that aren't actually my basis of doing the show and claims or beliefs. I appear to support churches' involvement in social justice issues. No, I think I appear to comment on, are they involved or aren't they? There seems to be polarity between the two sides. I'm interested in hearing both sides. I'm interested in hearing Michael. If this, I don't think it's Michael Clark. I think it's another Michael. If you'd like to come on the show and share your thoughts on if you support SDA gay pastors or not, that's what I'm interested in, is getting your thoughts on it. I'm a street epistemologist. I enjoy asking you what you believe, why you believe it, and can you defend it. I'm not really making claims. I'm observing and listening to people's stories. This other guy, Michael Doherty, just move on, pray for healing, and focus on your newfound truth. Let God convict on what he was. Each person wants, maybe each person, and time to follow his path to him, whether SDA or others. But well, thank you for your advice. I will take it under advisement. But I'm very happy doing what I do. Okay, last two questions. And thank you again for your time today. Those watching, I'm talking to Dr. Kevin Burton. And if you watch at the beginning, you'll find out more about him and what he is currently doing. But we're talking a lot today about his new book, available on Amazon. I was just looking at the Amazon. Where is it? I'll just see if I can bring it up onto the screen. Can you see that? It's a bit harder to see. But I noticed the hard copy, $176, and the paperback,
I don't set the price. It's
I know
New University Press.
they totally set the price, and it makes it very difficult. But the Kindle is a lot cheaper,
Yeah.
and I just want to encourage everybody, go and buy this book. I think this is a landmark book, and I really encourage people to go and check it out. And if you're interested at all in perspectives within Adventism and the shifting and the changing and all the stuff, this book is fantastic. Oh, and sorry, Michael, the question wasn't for me. It's just that when you said SDAQ&A, I thought it was. The question was for Kevin. Please let him answer. I'll step back, Michael. So what was the question? I'll just try and bring that up again. Do you remember? Are you asked? Is this the one, Michael? Do you? So I think he's saying, Kevin, do you support SDA gay pastors? One just retired with his gay wife in SoCal. And sorry for getting that wrong, Michael. I don't think it's Michael that we know.
I don't know who it is. So they're wanting to know my position on that. Yeah, good question. I mean, this is a hot topic today, right? I think the number one guide for this question is the golden rule: to do unto others as you would have them do unto you. That is the thing that sums up the law and the prophets, as Jesus says. And the challenge I think that we face is when you're trying to follow the teachings of Christ, it does come down to people's interpretations. And so we are going to differ. People will differ, and agreement can be hard. And yet the fact that golden rule says to reflect on yourself. What would you prefer being done to you? Whatever that is, then you should behave and act that way about other people. And so I would encourage Michael and whoever else to think about what that means in this context. I'm not going to give an answer to say exactly what a position would be, but I can tell you this: there's a lot of prejudice against LGBTQ folks. There's a lot of prejudice against them. And I certainly don't think that prejudice fits the golden rule at all. And I think that we are to love everyone as Jesus does. If he says to love your enemy, that means the worst possible person you could love for you love them. And that means everyone else that's in a better situation, you love them as well. And so the golden rule is my answer. I want people to know that I care about them as a person. I'm not here to judge people. That's ultimately everyone answers to God. Okay. And so I would rather build a relationship with people. I would rather love people and become friends and let the Holy Spirit do his job. Okay. And I will do mine. I will try to be an ambassador for Christ and love people as best as I can. Okay. And so that may not be the answer you're looking for. And yet it is the answer from my perspective. If we don't live according to the golden rule and love like Christ says to love, then we're missing the boat.
So these two questions are we've kind of covered, so I think there'll be a quick answer. But just interested in your thoughts on this, and then we will close with some thoughts on pushback you've had. And maybe you can put me in touch with Claudia, and I'll try and get her on the show to share her story as well. So we'll close on that. But just quickly, many Adventists today argue that the church's primary mission is evangelism, not social activism. Yet, if your historical thesis is correct, some of Adventism's founders were heavily involved in social reform movements. Has modern Adventism drifted away from part of its original DNA?
It's a great question. And it's one that people were debating back in the 1820s and 30s and 40s and 50s and 60s. and so forth. And the majority of Christians in America said that you need to be silent, don't get involved in politics, focus on the mission of the church, which is saving souls. And the abolitionists responded and said, absolutely not. We also support mission, but the thing that is challenging and hindering the mission is actually slavery. The majority were saying that the thing that hindered the mission of the church was abolitionism, and the abolitionists said, no, the thing that's hindering the mission of the church is slavery. Scripture says in the book of Revelation that the gospel is to be preached to every nation, tribe, language, and people. And if something like racism is present, then that means it will necessarily block some group of people that falls into the category of every nation, every language, every tribe, and people. And so racism is a hindrance to the gospel. And you cannot go forward and preach the gospel if you do not touch and speak against and denounce that evil. I don't think it's possible. So in a lot of ways, yes, I will say, I think that the pioneers challenge us today from the grave, as it were, by their recognition that you have to fight for the basic rights of people. Adventism is built on this concept. Think about something like the health message. This is about bodies as well as souls. And so, yes, Adventism should be still about those things. And I think the key is keeping them in balance. It's not that you just theology matters. I think theology matters. I think it's important. But so does the way we act and the way we behave. And so from my perspective, it's about trying to keep all of these kinds of things in balance and letting God lead and guide us. That's my perspective.
This is going to be a weird thing. My studio door has just blown open and it's raining. I'm going to ask you a question just to answer while I quickly go and address that.
Okay.
I'll be 2 minutes.
Okay.
Answer this question. I can hear you. I'm literally only meters away, but
Okay.
lock on it or something's broken. I just have to quickly fix that.
An apparition.
Funny
I'm
timing.
just joking.
Funny timing. Yeah. So you just sort of talk to my chair. I want to ask you about the amalgamation of man and beast comment. When was it? What are your thoughts on it? What was going on in her mind? Do you think she regretted ever saying it? She never really addressed it again.
She never did. Yeah.
Quick thoughts. Share with that. I will be right back.
Sure.
Before the rain destroys my speakers and microphones. And then if you've answered that, there's some other questions you might want to just address until I'm back. This doesn't always happen, but I'll be right back. Over to you, Kevin. You're now the host of the show.
All right. Well, let's see. Okay, so the question was the amalgamation of man and beast. Yeah, that's a statement that Ellen White makes for the first time, I believe, around 1858. And it caused problems from the very beginning because primarily for its lack of clarity. If you look, as the historian Benjamin Baker has done, what Ellen White is saying about Black people and about issues of race, she is clearly supporting and arguing for the full humanity of Black people. And she's condemning racism in the American North as well as South very strongly. The thing that is often done is that people assume that Ellen White is talking about Black people, and that is possible. Uriah Smith defends Ellen White, and he says some things that are deeply troubling about Hottentots and Digger Indians and so forth. And if you think about what's going on at this time, this is an era of no photographs, no video, of course, and everything that anyone in America, for example, is trying to wrap their head around about new sort of tribes or groups of people, maybe in Australia or some parts of the United States, they're having to get it from the so-called experts, anthropologists or proto-anthropologists and people who are, supporting or supposedly writing from a position of scientific authority. And that's all they can go on. And so there were genuine questions about groups like the Hottentots and Digger Indians and so forth, and Aboriginals in Australia. And at least Uriah Smith was thinking in those kinds of terms, and possibly Ellen White was as well. And that would be, I mean, that's hugely problematic, all right, for obvious reasons. But it's more of my view. I think that Matthew Cortman has written a great article on the amalgam. Oops, we lost me for a second. I think Matthew Cortman has written a great article on the amalgamation of man and beast, and talks about this statement in connection with the book of Yasher, which I had thought about before I read his article, and I think he's on to it. Something really critical here. The book of Yasher is mentioned in the Bible a couple of times. Like if you think about the sun standing still in Joshua, it says, as has been written in the book of Yasher. Maybe you would think Jasher because it's spelled with a J, but it would have been pronounced Yasher. And anyways, that book has been lost. I don't know that there is an original authentic book of Yasher from the early period or the time of Joshua. But in the 1840s, a book claiming to be the book of Yasher was translated into English for the first time. And I do not know if it's authentic or not. But regardless, it was taken as authentic by a lot of progressive Christian groups at the time, including some Adventists. And they basically had the position that if the book of Yasher does not contradict what we see in the Old Testament, then it can be relied upon with some amount of authority. And so you see a few comments from Uriah Smith and James White. They comment on it a little bit. And it seems as though Ellen White is borrowing her amalgamation argument from the book of Yasher. But what's interesting about the book of Yasher is that it does not talk about bestiality. It does talk about amalgamation, but it's amalgamation of man with man and beast with beast. And so different species intermixing and different groups of humans intermixing. This is what I think is going on in Ellen White's mind. She drops the amalgamation of man and beast. It's not in Patriarchs and Prophets. What is it replaced with? It's replaced with the interracial marriage of the descendants of Cain and the descendants of Seth. And Ellen White does use racial language to talk about this. And so I think that what she had in mind was an amalgamation of man with man. In other words, the descendants of Cain with the descendants of Seth. And also the intermixing of different species of animals. I suspect that is what she had in mind. But she did delete it from her future writing because she recognized it was controversial, and also because she did not want it to be used by people to suggest that racism was okay. But it's problematic, and it will probably never be resolved with any definitiveness at all. So I don't know. Peter's back. I have no idea if you heard any of what I said.
I heard it all.
I felt like I was talking to nobody, but
no, I heard
there it
all.
is.
And people are all watching.
Yeah.
Sorry about
And you
that.
had Matthew Cortman on your show, I think.
In fact, I was just going to say, when I heard you talking about him, and he has talked a bit about that, and has written a great book saying no to God, and has been on the show talking about the apocryphal works and whatnot. And he is coming back on the show. I was just chatting to him a couple of weeks ago. So I'll be sure to follow up that. No, I thought, thank you. I can see some of the interesting comments in the chat there. Now, those that are commenting, just remember that when the show finishes live, the live chat goes to a different place. It's a bit harder to find. What really helps the channel is if you guys, and there's some really good topics and questions there that you've raised, just log back in after the show's finished, if that's okay, and just cut and paste what you've written there now, and we can keep the conversation going. Also over on Facebook as well. In fact, I should just quickly check Facebook, because oh yes, there's lots of questions going on over there. Christy writes, fascinating for sure. Thank you, Kevin and Peter. I'm about a third of the way through the book. Other people are writing some good comments on Facebook. And we're live to Twitch and Rumble and Twitter. So yeah, it's really great seeing the community and the platform growing and growing. Yeah, so last question, and thank you again for being on the program. We've been chatting to Dr. Kevin Burton about his new book, Apocalyptic Abolitionism, and it's in the little top corner over here somewhere. If you just, it's a great cover, really stands out. Yeah, it's the mirror image. That's it. Thank you. And your website, if people want to get in touch with you, just seeing if I can bring that up on the list. Is it an easy.com to remember?
It's just my name, kevinmburton.com.
Perfect. So it's really a good website, very informative, and people can contact you from there too if they like. The book's available on Amazon. But in closing, I've heard that you have had a bit of pushback. There's been people in leadership, maybe administration, that don't like the content. I'm not sure why there is pushback. Why do you think there has been, and what kind of pushback has there been?
Yeah, that's great. It's nothing compared to Claudia, I think. Claudia is an incredible person, and I love her work, and I know that she's faced a lot of challenges, and I have faced some too, but I don't want to paint myself as some sort of living martyr or something like that, because that's not the case. But I have had my, there are some critics. One of the things that started this off was in the summer of 2020, and you can remember this is the summer George Floyd is murdered by the police and so forth, and it was a interesting time, pandemic, all that's happening. I wrote a short article for the NAD, their newsletter, something about Adventism and systemic racism, and I made the point the article super short, but I made the point that Adventists worked in anti-slavery arguments into all three of the three angels' messages. And that really ticked some people off, because they said, there's no such thing as a political aspect of the gospel.
Really?
Are we that close-minded, folks? Because you can't really get away from politics. It's in all of our lives. I mean, if you think about politics in the broadest sense of the term, that's just about living together with other people. And so there is going to be drama and things, and it's unavoidable. And so, especially in something like a democracy, which you have, or some people will say in purist terms, a republic in America. Where people have a voice, right? In nations where people have a voice, you can't avoid it. So anyhow, but that was the big rub. And so there were some people circulating emails that went all the way to the top of the church that said I'm an agent of Satan, and that I'm deceiving the brethren and the sisters because I'm telling them that social justice is part of the gospel. And really what it comes down to, Peter, I know that you are very happy to listen to both sides. I am too, so I don't want this to land the wrong way. But I have noticed a definite trend in my critics, and they are all MAGA Donald Trump supporters. And I have been very vocal in my opposition to Donald Trump. He is a raging bull that deserves prison, and he is a horrible president. He's ruining the world, ruining America. And I have no love or respect for that man. And I'm very happy to say it. I'm very okay with people on the right, generally speaking, but let's just not have this. And so, but pretty much everyone who's critiqued me has been a Trump supporter, either a diehard supporter or a very sympathetic supporter. And so I find that very interesting, because what I've noticed, and I know the names of many of my top critics because it's been leaked to me. I find it so fascinating, because the claim is that I'm being very political and so forth. And I'm like, I'm politically independent. I am neither Democrat nor Republican, never will be. Okay. And yet the people who are accusing me of being political are being just or even more so political in how they're navigating me. And there has been there have been people trying to, put pressure to, to have me silenced and so forth. And I've been told to be silent many times, and I'm not going to do it. I can't. So I'm just here, and as long as God calls me to be here.
Yeah.
So,
Well, I think that's good. That's kind of what I think people need to hear, and people in the comments who agree or disagree with you. We are practicing this notion that it's okay to speak up for what you believe in, and then to hopefully enter into civil conversation about it.
I hope so.
So I've been chatting with Dr. Kevin M. Burton, who is currently Assistant Professor of Church History at the Seventh-day Adventist Theological Seminary. I've put it on the screen because a lot of people have been asking, at Andrews University, and is Director of the Center for Adventist Research. And I think it's very commendable that someone who is currently employed by the Adventist Church is speaking so openly, and I really appreciate that. And people like Matthew Cortman and Matthew Lucio and I think Michael Campbell does a bit as well. You guys kind of, are doing a great thing. You're speaking up and you're being brave about it. And so are the baby boomers, but sadly when they do, they're getting shut down. But I hope they keep going. Got to keep
What about the
dialogue
busters,
going.
the baby busters?
Baby busters. Yeah, we just fund everything.
Oh,
We've just kept
okay,
the world.
so
We've just kept the world going.
oh, well. Well, Peter, I appreciate you having conversations. I
Thank you.
appreciate what you do to just try to facilitate discussion. I think it's important to do. And so thanks for what you're doing in that regard. We need to talk with each other, right?
Yeah, exactly. That's right.
Yeah.
These topics need to be broached and discussed, and I'd love to have you back on the show. I
We'll see
feel
what
like
happens.
we've
Yeah.
scratched the surface. Thanks for joining me, Kevin. Thank you, everybody, for watching. Don't forget, tomorrow, crossing fingers, Alexander Carpenter will be on with me as we do a short 20-minute program. I'm going to try and do it every week, sometimes with Alexander, sometimes just on my own. And it's going to be a great way to, it's basically an Adventist current affairs program. What's happening in the church right now? There's going to be topics that I'll talk about, like recently, what's his name from 3ABN, mental blank.
The dude in charge, Danny Shelton.
Danny Shelton just did a big talk about his opposition to LGBT plus in the church. We're going to look at not necessarily tomorrow, but these are things that we're going to be talking about. Walter Veith and his predictions of the second coming. I love how he says all these dates and things, and it's going to be by 2027. But hey, I'm not saying that. I'm not making any claims. This is just what the Bible says and what the Spirit of prophecy says.
Right.
And
right.
There's a
Who can argue with
whole,
that?
yeah. And often I'm like,
Airtight
there's so many
logic.
things I want to talk about every week, but I don't get a chance to. So it's going to be a short show every week. And those who normally tune in for Good News Fellowship at that time slot is changing. So keep an eye out for that. Okay, until next time, and one more time, I'll bring it up on the screen. We'll move to the side. Go and buy this book, everybody. And we'll look forward to seeing you all again tomorrow. See you later.